The auditorium erupted in applause. But Nolan Carter's heart sank as his name echoed through the speakers. He stood frozen on the stage, his black graduation cap slightly askew, the weight of his family's absence heavier than the diploma in his hand. In that fleeting moment, as thousands clapped for strangers, Nolan realized he was utterly alone, and the reason why burned like a fresh wound. He scanned the crowd one last time, hoping against hope to see his parents' faces. But the sea of strangers offered no comfort. For years at Stanford, countless sleepless nights, and a degree in computer science earned with honors, none of it mattered to the Carters. Not after Nolan had come out as gay during his senior year, shattering their perfect image of the son they'd raised in their pristine Connecticut suburb. As he descended the stage, his phone buzzed. A text from his younger sister. "Lila, I'm so sorry. Nolan. They wouldn't let me come. I love you." His throat tightened. Lila was the only one who'd stood by him, sneaking calls and messages when their parents weren't watching. The Carters had cut him off financially and emotionally the moment he'd told them about Ethan, his boyfriend of 2 years. "You're no son of ours," his father, Richard, had spat. His mother, Eleanor, standing silently behind him, her eyes averted. Nolan's steps echoed in the empty corridor as he left the ceremony, the cheers fading behind him. He wasn't just leaving Stanford. He was leaving behind the life he'd once known. But as he stepped into the California sunlight, a familiar figure leaned against a lamppost, arms crossed, a crooked smile on his face. Ethan Caldwell, with his effortless charm and warm brown eyes, was everything Nolan's family despised: openly gay, unapologetic, and fiercely loyal. "You did it, babe," Ethan said, pulling Nolan into a hug. "I'm so proud of you." Nolan buried his face in Ethan's shoulder, the scent of his cedarwood cologne grounding him. "They didn't come," he whispered, his voice cracking. Ethan's arms tightened around him. "Then they don't deserve you. But I'm here. Always." That night, in their small off-campus apartment, Nolan and Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, sharing a bottle of cheap wine. The graduation gown hung on the wall like a ghost, a reminder of the day's bittersweet triumph. Ethan traced circles on Nolan's hand, his touch a quiet anchor. "What's next?" he asked, his voice soft but probing. Nolan stared at the flickering candle on the coffee table. "I don't know. I've got no family, no safety net. Just you and this degree. And that's enough," Ethan said firmly. "You're brilliant, Nolan. You'll build something incredible. We'll build it together." But Nolan's mind was elsewhere, snagged on a memory he'd buried deep. Growing up, he'd always sensed something off about his family: whispers between his parents, locked drawers in his father's study, and cryptic comments from his grandmother before she passed. "Your father's not who he seems," she'd said once, her voice trembling. Nolan had been too young to understand. But now, disowned and discarded, those words clawed their way back. "I want to know why," Nolan said suddenly, his voice sharp. "Why they hate me so much. It's not just about me being gay. There's something else." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Nolan hesitated, then stood, pacing the small living room. "My daddy's hiding something. I overheard him once, years ago, arguing with my mom about keeping it buried. I thought it was just their usual fights. But now I'm not so sure." Ethan leaned forward, his expression serious. You think it's connected to why they cut you off? Maybe, Nolan said, his mind racing. I need to find out. If they're going to throw me away, I deserve to know the truth. The next morning, Nolan sat at his desk, laptop open, diving into a digital rabbit hole. His computer science skills weren't just for coding apps. They were a weapon for uncovering secrets. He started with public records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, anything tied to Richard Carter. Most of it was mundane, but one detail caught his eye, a gap in his father's history. A missing year between his college graduation and his first job. No address, no employment, nothing. That's weird, Nolan muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Ethan peered over his shoulder, sipping coffee. What's weird? There's a whole year of my dad's life unaccounted for. Like he just disappeared. Ethan frowned. People don't just vanish for a year. Maybe he was traveling, without a trace, no credit card records, no leases, nothing. Nolan's jaw tightened. He was hiding something. Over the next few weeks, Nolan became obsessed. He hacked into old email accounts his father had used for work, cross-referenced names with social media, and even dug into newspaper archives. Ethan watched with a mix of admiration and worry, knowing Nolan was teetering on the edge of something dangerous. One night, Nolan found it, a scanned document buried in an obscure legal database. A name, Michael Reynolds. It was linked to his father's social security number, but the dates didn't add up. Michael Reynolds had been arrested in 1995 for fraud, released after a short sentence, and then nothing. The trail ended. But the photo attached to the record was unmistakably Richard Carter. Younger, with a different haircut but the same cold blue eyes. Holy shit, Nolan whispered, his heart pounding. My dad, he's not who he says he is. Ethan's eyes widened as he leaned closer to the screen. What does this mean? It means, Nolan said, his voice trembling with anger and determination, that my father's been living a lie. And I'm going to find out why. Nolan's discovery lit a fire in him, but also cast a shadow over his days. The apartment, once a sanctuary for him and Ethan, now felt like a war room, cluttered with printouts, sticky notes, and empty coffee mugs. Every lead about Michael Reynolds pulled Nolan deeper into a maze of lies. And Ethan, though supportive, began to worry about the toll it was taking. You haven't slept in days, Ethan said one evening, setting a plate of pasta in front of Nolan. You need to slow down. I can't, Nolan replied, his eyes fixed on a laptop screen. This is bigger than me. If my dad's been hiding a whole other identity, what else is he capable of? Ethan sat beside him, his hand resting on Nolan's shoulder. I get it. But you're not just fighting for answers, you're fighting for yourself. Don't lose who you are in this. Nolan met Ethan's gaze, the warmth in those brown eyes pulling him back from the edge. I won't, he promised, though doubt gnawed at him. He leaned in, their lips meeting in a brief, grounding kiss. For a moment, the weight of his mission lifted, replaced by the quiet certainty of Ethan's love. But the obsession returned with a vengeance. Nolan tracked down an old associate of Michael Reynolds, a man named Victor Hayes, who now lived in a rundown apartment in Oakland. Posing as a journalist, Nolan arranged a meeting. The drive across the Bay Bridge was tense, with Ethan insisting on coming along just in case. Victor was a wiry man in his 50s, with a smoker's rasp and a suspicious squint. "What do you want with Michael?" he asked, leaning against his apartment door. "I'm researching a story about financial scams in the 90s, Nolan lied smoothly. "Your name came up as someone who knew him." Victor snorted. "Knew him? Yeah, I knew him. Guy was a genius with numbers, but a snake. Ran a Ponzi scheme, fleeced a bunch of rich folks, then got caught. Did a year in county, then poof, gone. Heard he changed his name. Started over." Nolan's pulse quickened. "Change his name to what?" Victor shrugged. "Hell if I know. He didn't exactly send me Christmas cards." As they drove back, Ethan glanced at Nolan. "You think your dad reinvented himself as Richard Carter after prison?" "It fits," Nolan said, gripping the steering wheel. "But why? Why go to such lengths to hide it?" The answer came a week later, in the form of a faded newspaper clipping Nolan found in a digitized archive. It detailed the collapse of a small investment firm in Boston, tied to Michael Reynolds' fraud. One name stood out among the victims: Eleanor Whitaker, Nolan's mother. The realization hit like a punch. His parents had met because of the scam. Had Eleanor known who Richard really was when they married? Or was she another victim of his lies? Nolan confronted Lila over a secure video call, careful not to alert their parents. "Did you ever hear Mom or Dad mention someone named Michael Reynolds?" he asked. Lila's face paled. "No, but I found something weird last year in Dad's study. A lockbox with some old IDs. I didn't think much of it, but one had a different name. I thought it was a mistake." "It wasn't," Nolan said grimly. "Can you get it?" Lila hesitated. "If they catch me, I'm screwed. They're already watching me like hawks because I talked to you." "I know," Nolan said, guilt twisting in his chest. "But this could explain everything." Lila agreed, promising to sneak into the study when their parents were out. Meanwhile, Nolan and Ethan dug deeper, uncovering more victims of Michael Reynolds' scam. 1. A retired teacher named Margaret Cole lived in San Francisco. Nolan reached out, and she agreed to meet at a quiet cafe. Margaret was kind but guarded, her eyes sharp despite her age. "Michael Reynolds ruined my life," she said, stirring her tea. "Took my savings, my husband's pension. We never recovered." "Why do you care?" Nolan hesitated, then told the truth. "I think he's my father." Margaret's spoon clattered against the cup. "God help you, son. If he's your father, he's a man without a soul." Her words haunted Nolan as he and Ethan walked home through the foggy San Francisco streets. "What if she's right?" Nolan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if he's just evil?" Ethan stopped, turning Nolan to face him. "Then you're not him. You're better. You're honest. And you're fighting for the truth, not running from it." Nolan wanted to believe him, but the weight of his father's secrets pressed harder. That night, Lila sent a photo of the ID she'd found, Michael Reynolds, with Richard Carter's face staring back. Alongside it was a letter, yellowed with age, addressed to Eleanor. The handwriting was unmistakably Richard's, begging her forgiveness for what I did to you. Nolan's hands shook as he read it. His father hadn't just scammed Eleanor. He'd manipulated her into loving him, building a family on a foundation of lies. And now, that same man had disowned Nolan for being true to himself. The irony was a knife in his heart. "We need to confront him," Nolan said, his voice steady with resolve. "But not yet. I need more." Ethan nodded, his expression fierce. Whatever you need, I'm with you. The letter changed everything. Nolan clutched the scanned image on his phone, rereading his father's words to Eleanor. I never meant to hurt you. Please, let me make it right. It was dated a year before their marriage. Proof that Richard or Michael had known exactly what he was doing when he wove himself into Eleanor's life. Nolan's anger simmered, but so did his need for answers. Why had his mother stayed, and why they turned their backs on him so completely? Ethan suggested a break, a weekend away to clear Nolan's head. They drove up the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean glittering under the summer sun. At a secluded beach, they walked barefoot, the sand cool between their toes. Ethan's laughter as he dodged a wave pulled Nolan out of his spiral. If only for a moment. You're allowed to live. You know, Ethan said, nudging Nolan's shoulder. This fight doesn't have to consume you. Nolan looked at him, the wind tousling Ethan's blonde hair. I don't know how to stop. Not until I understand why they hate me so much. Ethan's expression softened. They don't hate you. They're afraid of you. You're everything they can't control, honest, brave, and real. Nolan kissed him then, the crash of waves drowning out the world. For that fleeting moment, he felt whole. But the weight of his mission returned as they drove back to the city, a plan forming in his mind. He needed to confront Eleanor. If she'd known about Richard's past, she was complicit in his lies. If she hadn't, she was another victim, and Nolan needed to know which. He reached out to Lila again, asking her to arrange a meeting. Lila, now a freshman at Yale, was risking everything to help him, but she agreed, setting up a lunch with their mother in New Haven under the guise of a school visit. Nolan flew out alone, not wanting to drag Ethan into the emotional minefield. The cafe was quaint, with ivy-covered walls and the hum of college students. Eleanor arrived, her tailor blazer and pearl earrings a stark contrast to Nolan's casual hoodie. She froze when she saw him. Nolan, she said, her voice tight. What are you doing here? I need to talk, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. About Dad. About Michael Reynolds. Eleanor's face drained of color. She sat, her hands clasped tightly. How did you? I found a letter, Nolan cut in. The ID. Everything. Why did you stay with him? Mom? After what he did to you? Eleanor's eyes darted around, as if expecting Richard to appear. You don't understand, she whispered. He was different back then. Charming. Broken. He said he loved me. That he'd changed. He scammed you, Nolan said, his voice rising. He ruined lives. And you married him. I had no choice. Eleanor snapped, then caught herself, lowering her voice. I was pregnant with you. I needed stability. He promised me a new life, and he gave it to us. Nolan's heart stopped. You stayed because of me? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I thought I was protecting you. But when you told us about Ethan, your father said it would ruin everything. He said we had to protect the family name. Protect his lies? You mean? Nolan said bitterly. You let him throw me out to save his reputation. Eleanor reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Nolan, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to fix it. You could have chosen me, he said, standing. But you didn't. He left the cafe, his chest tight with betrayal. On the flight back, he replayed the conversation, each word cutting deeper. Eleanor had chosen Richard's lies over her own son. But the puzzle wasn't complete. Why was Richard so obsessed with control? What was he still hiding? Back in San Francisco, Ethan was waiting at the airport, his smile a balm to Nolan's raw nerves. "How'd it go?" he asked, pulling Nolan into a hug. "She knew," Nolan said, his voice hollow. "She stayed with him anyway." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That we keep digging together." Nolan nodded, a new fire kindling in him. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every truth his father had buried. Over the next month, he and Ethan tracked down more of Michael Reynolds' victims, piecing together a pattern of manipulation. Richard had targeted vulnerable people, charmed them, then vanished when the law closed in. But one name kept surfacing: Daniel Harper, a former business partner who disappeared after the scam collapsed. Nolan found Daniel living under a new name in Seattle, running a small bookstore. He and Ethan drove up, the road trip a mix of tense anticipation and quiet moments of connection. Daniel was a quiet man, his face lined with regret. When Nolan mentioned Michael Reynolds, Daniel's hand shook. "He was my best friend," Daniel said, "until he betrayed me. Took everything, my money, my reputation. I had to start over." "Did he ever mention a family?" Nolan asked. Daniel frowned. "No. But he was secretive. Always said he had plans, a way to make it all right. I never trusted him after that." As they left, Nolan felt the pieces falling into place. Richard's life was a house of cards, built on stolen identities and broken trust. But the final piece, the reason for his cruelty to Nolan, remained elusive. Nolan knew he had to confront his father. But first, he needed undeniable proof. Nolan's search became a double-edged sword, cutting into his sleep, his focus, and even his time with Ethan. Their apartment, once filled with laughter and late-night talks, now hummed with the constant click of Nolan's keyboard. Ethan tried to keep things light, cooking dinners and dragging Nolan out for walks. But the strain was palpable. One night, as rain pattered against the windows, Ethan sat across from Nolan, his expression serious. "You're slipping away," he said. "I'm losing you to this." Nolan looked up from his laptop, guilt twisting in his chest. "I'm doing this for us. For me. If I don't find the truth, it'll haunt me forever." Ethan reached across the table, taking Nolan's hand. "I know. But I need you here, too. Not just chasing ghosts." Nolan squeezed his hand, the warmth grounding him. "I promise. After this, I'll stop. But I'm so close." Ethan sighed but nodded. "Okay. What's the next step?" Nolan had a lead, a storage unit in Richard's name, tucked away in a small town outside Hartford. Lila had found a receipt in their father's study, and Nolan was certain it held answers. He and Ethan flew to Connecticut, renting a car to reach the facility. The storage unit was a rusted metal box, its lock old but sturdy. Nolan's heart raced as he picked it, a skill he'd learned in his hacking days. Inside, they found boxes of documents, photos, and old floppy disks. One box held a journal, its pages filled with Richard's meticulous handwriting. Nolan read aloud, his voice shaking. "If anyone finds out, it's over. The new life, the family gone. I can't let that happen." Ethan's eyes widened. "He's terrified of being exposed." Nolan nodded, flipping through the journal. It detailed Richard's transformation from Michael Reynolds to the man he was now. New name, new city, new lies. But one entry stopped Nolan cold. Daniel's son is the key. If he talks, I'm done. Daniel's son? Ethan asked, frowning. Who's that? Nolan's mind raced. Daniel Harper had mentioned no children, but the journal suggested otherwise. Was Richard still manipulating someone? Even now, Nolan took photos of the journal, his resolve hardening. They returned to San Francisco, the evidence burning a hole in Nolan's mind. He reached out to Daniel again, this time by phone. Did you have a son? Nolan asked, his voice steady despite his nerves. Daniel's silence was deafening. Finally, he said, yes. But he died. Car accident. 10 years ago. What? Nolan's heart sank. I'm sorry. I found something in my father's journal. He mentioned your son as a threat. Daniel's voice hardened. Michael always played dirty. If he's using my son's memory against me, he's lower than I thought. The call left Nolan reeling. Richard's fear wasn't about Daniel's son. It was about someone else. Someone still alive. Nolan dug into the floppy disks, using an old computer to access their contents. Most were financial records, but one held a single file, a scanned birth certificate for a boy named Caleb Harper, born to Daniel's wife. The date matched Nolan's own birth year. The realization hit like a freight train. I'm Caleb, Nolan whispered, his hands trembling. I'm Daniel's son. Ethan's jaw dropped. What? How? Nolan's voice shook as he pieced it together. Richard, Michael, must have taken me. Maybe to control Daniel. Maybe to hurt him. That's why he's so paranoid. I'm the secret he's been hiding. Ethan pulled Nolan into a fierce hug. We'll figure this out. But you need to be sure. Nolan spent days cross-referencing records, confirming the truth. His birth certificate, the one he'd grown up with, was a forgery. The real one, buried in Richard's storage unit, named him Caleb Harper, son of Daniel and Laura Harper. Richard had stolen him, built a new life with Eleanor, and raised Nolan as his own to cover his tracks. The betrayal was staggering. Nolan wasn't just disowned for being gay. He was a living reminder of Richard's darkest sin. But the truth wasn't enough. Nolan needed to confront him, to make him face the consequences. He and Ethan planned carefully, knowing Richard would lash out if cornered. They contacted a lawyer, a friend of Ethan's from Stanford, who specialized in family law. She agreed to help, warning Nolan that the legal battle would be brutal. You're not just fighting for yourself, she said. You're fighting for justice. Nolan nodded, his jaw set. I'm ready. The truth about his identity shattered Nolan's world, but also gave him purpose. He wasn't just Nolan Carter, the disowned son. He was Caleb Harper, a stolen child, and he would reclaim his story. Ethan stood by him, a steady presence as they prepared to confront Richard. But first, Nolan needed to tell Daniel. They drove back to Seattle, the weight of the revelation heavy in the air. Daniel's bookstore was quiet, the smell of old paper and coffee grounding Nolan as he faced the man who was his real father. Daniel's eyes widened when Nolan showed him the birth certificate. You're Caleb, Daniel whispered, tears streaming down his face. My boy. I thought you were gone. Nolan's throat tightened as Daniel pulled him into a hug, the kind of embrace he'd never known from Richard. I didn't know, Nolan said. Not until now. Daniel's voice broke. Michael took everything from me. My wife left after we lost you. I thought you were dead. I'm here now, Nolan said, his own eyes burning. And I'm going to make him pay. The reunion was bittersweet, but it fueled Nolan's resolve. He and Ethan returned to San Francisco, working with their lawyer to build a case. They gathered evidence, documents, the journal, witness statements from Margaret and Victor. Lila, risking her own safety, smuggled more records from Richard's study, including bank statements showing payments to a private investigator. Richard had been watching Daniel, ensuring he never got too close to the truth. As the confrontation loomed, Nolan struggled with his emotions. He loved Ethan, but the pain of his parents' betrayal made it hard to trust anyone. One night, as they lay in bed, Nolan confessed his fear. "What if this breaks me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Ethan turned to him, his hand resting on Nolan's cheek. "It won't. You're stronger than you know. And I'm not going anywhere." Nolan kissed him, the warmth of Ethan's lips a reminder of what he was fighting for. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "You deserve everything," Ethan replied, his voice fierce. "And we're going to get it." The plan was set. Nolan would confront Richard at a family event, a charity gala in Hartford where the Carters would be center stage. Lila got them invitations, her loyalty to Nolan outweighing her fear of their parents. The night of the gala, Nolan and Ethan dressed in sharp suits, their hands clasped tightly as they entered the glittering ballroom. Richard stood at the front, charming the crowd with his polished smile. Eleanor was beside him, her face a mask of composure. Nolan's heart pounded as he stepped forward, Ethan at his side. The room fell silent as he raised his voice. "Richard Carter," Nolan said, his tone steady but laced with fury. Or should I say Michael Reynolds? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard's smile froze, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing here?" he hissed. "I'm here to tell the truth," Nolan said, holding up the birth certificate. "You stole me. I'm Caleb Harper, son of Daniel Harper, the man you destroyed." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. The crowd murmured. "Phone's already out, recording the scene." Richard's face reddened, but he tried to laugh it off. "This is absurd. He's delusional." "Then explain this," Nolan said, projecting the journal entries onto a screen behind him, thanks to a hack projector system. The words, Richard's own confessions, glowed for all to see. "You built your life on lies. You disown me for being gay, but you're the one who's been hiding." Security moved toward Nolan, but Ethan stepped in front, his presence commanding. "Let him speak," he said, his voice calm but firm. Nolan continued, his voice breaking with emotion. "You took me for my real father. You used my mother. And when I dared to be myself, you threw me away. But I'm done being your secret." The crowd was silent, the weight of Nolan's words sinking in. Richard's composure cracked, his voice trembling as he shouted, "Get him out!" But it was too late. The truth was out, recorded and spreading like wildfire. Eleanor sobbed, her facade crumbling. Lila ran to Nolan, hugging him tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. As security escorted them out, Nolan felt a strange peace. He'd exposed Richard's lies, not just for himself, but for Daniel, for Margaret, for every life his father had ruined. Ethan's hand found his, their fingers interlocking. "You did it," Ethan said, his eyes shining with pride. "Not yet," Nolan replied. "But it's a start." The fallout was immediate. By morning, the gala confrontation was trending online. The hashtag Caleb Harper gaining traction as news outlets picked up the story. Nolan and Ethan watched from their apartment, the TV blaring with headlines about Richard Carter's double life. Daniel called, his voice thick with gratitude. "You gave me my son back," he said. "I'll never forget that." Nolan's heart swelled, but the victory was bittersweet. Eleanor reached out, begging to meet, but Nolan wasn't ready. She'd chosen Richard's lies over him once. Trust would take time. Lila, however, became a constant in his life, visiting when she could, her bond with Nolan stronger than ever. The legal battle began, with Richard facing charges for fraud and kidnapping. Nolan testified, his voice steady as he recounted the years of manipulation. The courtroom was packed, the weight of his words shifting the narrative. Richard's empire crumbled, his reputation in tatters. Eleanor, torn between guilt and loyalty, stood by him, but her eyes told Nolan she was breaking. Through it all, Ethan was Nolan's rock. They moved to a new apartment, a fresh start in a city that felt like home. One evening, as they sat on their balcony overlooking the bay, Nolan turned to Ethan. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said, his voice soft. Ethan smiled, his hand finding Nolan's. "You would have found a way. But I'm glad I was here." Nolan leaned in, their kiss slow and certain, a promise of a life they'd build together. The past still hurt, but no longer defined him. He was Caleb Harper, but he was also Nolan Carter, the man who'd faced his demons and won. Months later, Nolan and Daniel opened a foundation for victims of fraud, using Nolan's tech skills to track down scammers. It was a small step, but it felt right. At the foundation's launch, Nolan stood before a crowd, Ethan and Lila at his side, Daniel beaming with pride. "I was disowned for being who I am," Nolan said, his voice clear. "But I found my truth, in my family, not the one I was born into, but the one I chose. That's what matters." The crowd applauded, but Nolan's eyes were on Ethan, whose smile said everything. The secret that had torn his life apart had also set him free. He was no longer just a son, a victim, or a secret. He was Nolan, loved and whole, ready to face whatever came next.